I used to believe that family meant unconditional support, that blood would always be thicker than water, and that the love of parents would be reflected in their children's treatment of each other. I was wrong. My name is Rebecca Wilson, Becca. To those who know me well. If you're familiar with Wilson Family Vineyards, the premium wine producer whose bottles grace the shelves of upscale stores across New England, then you already know half my story. What you don't know is how I went from being the invisible daughter to the woman who changed everything. Growing up on our sprawling Vermont estate, nestled between rolling hills and rows of meticulously tended grapevines, I learned early that, in my family, tradition wasn't just respected, it was revered. And tradition dictated that the vineyard business belonged to the men, while the women married well and hosted charity events. My father, Harold Wilson, made this abundantly clear without ever having to say it outright. While my older brother, Tom, was being taught the secrets of soil composition and fermentation techniques, and my sister Liz was marrying James, the son of a neighboring vineyard owner, I was pursuing a degree in viticulture and oenology, much to my family's bemused tolerance. Becca and her books, they'd say, as if my education was a quirky hobby rather than a profession. Everyone needs a passion project, my mother would say with a pat on my hand, her diamond bracelet catching the sunlight. But darling, remember who you are. A Wilson woman, which apparently meant standing in the background, looking elegant, and never questioning why my business degree and specialized wine education qualified me only to give occasional tours to visitors who wanted the authentic family experience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My father's health began declining 3 years ago. A stroke that left him weaker on his right side, but just as sharp-minded and stubborn as ever. During those months of his recovery, I stepped up. Not because I was asked to, but because I saw what needed to be done. I reorganized delivery schedules, negotiated better contracts with our distributors, and implemented a new inventory system that saved us thousands in the first quarter alone. Each night I'd sit beside his bed with spreadsheets and projections, speaking softly about the changes I'd made and the results we were seeing. He'd listen, occasionally nod, sometimes offer a gruff suggestion. I took those moments as approval, as recognition. I believed I was finally proving my worth. The Wilson tradition is changing, I told my mother one evening as we shared tea in the kitchen. Dad sees what I can do now. She looked at me with something like pity in her eyes. Traditions don't change, Rebecca. They endure. That's why they're traditions. I should have heeded the warning in her words. When my father passed away last winter, the vineyard was blanketed in snow, the vines dormant and waiting for spring. The family gathered in our old Victorian home, the one with the wraparound porch where I'd spent summers reading while my siblings learned the business. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week, but Tom had already begun moving into our father's office, rearranging furniture and hanging his college diploma where Dad's had been. "Just getting things in order," he said when he caught me watching from the doorway. Dad would want business to continue without interruption. I nodded, swallowing the question that burned in my throat. What about all I'd done during his illness? What about the improvements I'd made, the profits I'd generated, the modern approaches I'd introduced that were finally bringing our century-old vineyard into the present? The day of the reading arrived cold and bright, sunlight glinting off fresh snow as we filed into Mr. Jenkins' wood-paneled office downtown. I sat straight-backed in a leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, wearing the pearl earrings my father had given me on my 21st birthday. The only gift he'd ever chosen himself, my mother had told me. That had to mean something. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading in his precise, measured voice. The family home went to my mother. The vacation. Property in Maine was split between Tom and Liz. The investments, the stocks, the collection of rare wines, divided. And then came the vineyard, the business, the legacy. Wilson Family Vineyards, including all land, structures, equipment, inventory, and associated business assets, I leave to my son, Thomas Wilson, who will continue the Wilson tradition of excellence. The room seemed to tilt. I felt my mother's hand cover mine, a gesture meant to comfort that somehow felt like restraint. A yearly stipend of $50,000 will be provided to my daughter, Rebecca, to be paid from vineyard profits, contingent upon her continued assistance with customer relations and events. Customer relations and events. After all my work, my education, my proven results, I was to be the family tour guide. Forever. I looked at Tom, expecting to see at least some discomfort, some acknowledgement of the inequity. Instead, he was nodding, as if this outcome had been as inevitable as the changing seasons. Liz caught my eye and offered what she probably thought was a sympathetic smile. "It's for the best, Becca. You know how stressful running the business is. This way you can still be involved without all the pressure." Involved. Like a distant cousin invited to holiday dinners. Not like someone who had poured their heart and mind into saving the vineyard when it was floundering during our father's illness. I said nothing as Mr. Jenkins finished reading, as papers were signed, as my siblings discussed their plans over coffee. I said nothing as we drove back to the house, as my mother squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Your father had his reasons, dear." I said nothing that night as I packed a single suitcase, wrote a brief note, and slipped out before dawn. The last thing I saw as I drove away was the vineyard sign, Wilson Family Vineyards, Esther 1923, illuminated by my headlights for one brief moment before disappearing into the darkness behind me. I headed west because it felt like the opposite of everything I'd known. Vermont to Oregon, traditional to innovative, constraint to possibility. My savings wouldn't last long, but they would give me enough time to figure out what came next in a life I suddenly had to reimagine. Portland welcomed me with rain and unexpected warmth. I found a small apartment above a coffee shop in the Southeast District, the kind of place where baristas knew regular customers by name and the walls featured rotating displays of local art. It was nothing like the pristine, curated spaces I'd grown up in, and that was exactly what I needed. The first few weeks passed in a blur of job applications and research. I applied to established wineries in the Willamette Valley, only to receive polite rejections or offers for entry-level positions that ignored my experience and education. Without the Wilson name behind me, I was just another applicant with claims they couldn't or wouldn't verify. One evening, drowning my frustrations in a glass of Oregon Pinot Noir at a small wine bar, I struck up a conversation with the woman beside me. Sophia Martinez, with her curly hair and infectious laugh, turned out to be a small business attorney with a passion for the local wine scene. "So you're from the Wilson Family Vineyards?" she asked, eyebrows raising. "I've had their Cabernet Franc. Exceptional, but a bit stuck in the past. No offense." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its bitterness. None taken. Being stuck in the past is the Wilson way. "Not your way, though," she observed, studying me over the rim of her glass. "No," I said, and for the first time since leaving Vermont, I felt something other than loss. Something like possibility. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sophia's parting words. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better. I'd insisted I wasn't looking for revenge, and she'd just smiled. "Call it what you want, just make sure it's yours." The next morning, I opened my laptop and typed, "Second Chance Sellers." It started small, almost microscopic. I used the remainder of my savings to lease a tiny production space on the outskirts of Portland and purchase grapes from local growers I'd connected with through Sophia's network. I couldn't afford to buy land yet, but I could create something. That was entirely mine. The first year was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in my production space to save on rent. I learned every aspect of the business from the ground up, not as a Wilson, but as Becca, a newcomer who had to prove herself with every barrel, every bottle, every label. I developed a small collection of wines that reflected my philosophy: respect for tradition, but embracing innovation. Wines that told a story of transformation. I designed labels featuring a phoenix, subtle, elegant, rising. No family crest, no establishment date, nothing to connect me to the Wilson legacy. This was my beginning. When the first bottles of Second Chance Cellars were ready, I didn't approach big distributors or high-end restaurants. Instead, I focused on local wine shops, farmers markets, and community events. I poured samples, shared my passion, and built relationships one conversation at a time. I didn't mention my background, and no one connected the quiet winemaker from Portland with the prestigious Wilson family of Vermont. Slowly, word began to spread. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A local food blogger mentioned my Pinot Noir as a revelation, complex yet approachable, the work of a winemaker who understands both science and soul. A small but influential wine newsletter featured Second Chance Cellars in their Newcomers to Watch section. The Phoenix blend, my signature red, sold out within days of each small batch release. I reinvested every dollar of profit, slowly expanding production, improving equipment, and beginning to build a name for something that was genuinely mine. I still checked the Wilson Family Vineyards website occasionally, watching as they continued on their predictable path, releasing the same wines in the same quantities year after year. No innovation, no passion, just tradition. Through Sophia, who had become not just my attorney but my friend, I learned that Tom was struggling with the business side of the vineyard. Orders were being delayed, relationships with distributors were fraying, and their market share was gradually declining. Liz and her husband had taken over the customer-facing aspects of the business, turning the vineyard into more of a tourist destination than a serious wine producer. They're looking for someone to blame, Sophia told me over dinner one night, after speaking with a colleague in Vermont's wine industry. Your brother's telling people that you took proprietary information when you left, that your success is built on stolen Wilson techniques. I nearly choked on my water. That's absurd. Everything I do is completely different from their methods. That's the whole point. Sophia nodded. I know, but they're scrambling, and you're an easy target. Just be prepared. I was prepared for accusations. I was prepared for legal threats. That would ultimately prove baseless. What I wasn't prepared for was the email from my mother that arrived a few days later, short and devastating in its simplicity. Your father left something for you. Mr. Jenkins has it. Come home. Come home. As if it were that simple. As if the past 18 months of building my life from scratch could be dismissed with 2 words. I didn't respond. Whatever it was, it couldn't be important enough to undo all I'd accomplished. If it had been truly significant, it would have been included in the will. This was probably just another attempt to draw me back into their orbit, to keep me connected to a family that had never truly seen me. A week later, another email arrived, this time from Mr. Jenkins himself. Ms. Wilson, I understand your reluctance, but this matter cannot be handled remotely. Your father was explicit in his instructions. The item is to be delivered to you in person, 1 year after his passing, and only if certain conditions have been met. Please contact my office to arrange a meeting. Certain conditions. What game? Was this? What final control was my father attempting to exert from beyond the grave? I might have ignored it if not for the timing. Second Chance Cellars had just been invited to participate in the Northwest Wine Showcase, a prestigious event that could catapult my small operation into a new league. I had worked for this, earned this on my own merits. Going back to Vermont meant putting that at risk. But something in Mr. Jenkins's formal tone suggested this wasn't a ploy. For all his faults, my father had been meticulous in his planning. deliberate in his actions. If he had left something with specific instructions, there was a purpose. So I booked a flight, arranged for my assistant to handle preparations for the showcase, and headed back to Burlington, telling myself this would be a brief, business-like visit. In and out, with minimal family contact. The town looked the same. The same historic buildings along Church Street, the same view of Lake Champlain, the same feeling of stepping back in time. I checked into a hotel rather than staying at the family home, a decision that prompted a hurt text from my mother that I chose not to answer. Mr. Jenkins's office was unchanged, down to the scent of lemon polish and old books. He rose when his secretary showed me in, extending his hand with formal politeness. "Rebecca, thank you for coming. I understand it wasn't a simple decision." I took the offered seat, keeping my back straight, my expression neutral. "I'm curious. What was so important it required a transcontinental flight and couldn't be shipped or explained over the phone?" He adjusted his glasses, a gesture I remembered from countless childhood visits to this office. "Your father left specific instructions. This item was to be given to you 1 year after his passing, but only if you had established yourself independently. I've been following your progress with interest." My jaw tightened. "You've been monitoring me." "Observing from a distance," he corrected, opening a drawer in his desk. "Your father wanted to be certain you had found your own path, not simply taken a position with another established vineyard or married into the industry." The implication that I would have taken either of those easier routes stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "It seems you've exceeded expectations," he continued, placing a sealed envelope on the desk between us. "Second Chance Cellars has made quite an impression in a remarkably short time." I stared at the envelope. It was thick, cream-colored stationery with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. Not Rebecca or even Becca, but Firebird, his childhood nickname for me, abandoned as I grew older. A name I hadn't heard in 20 years. "What is this?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "I wasn't privy to the contents," Mr. Jenkins said, sliding the envelope toward me. "Only the conditions for its delivery. This is between you and your father now." My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. Whatever was inside had weight, literally and figuratively. "Would you like some privacy?" he offered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He left quietly, closing the door behind him. In the silence of the office, surrounded by legal books and the faint ticking of an antique clock, I broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages of my father's precise handwriting, and a smaller, sealed envelope marked "The Real Will." My heart thundered in my chest as I began to read. "My dearest Firebird, if you're reading this, then you've done exactly what I believed you would. You've flown. You've built something of your own, something that doesn't bear our name but carries your spirit. I always knew you would. I owe you an explanation and perhaps an apology, though I maintain that what I did was necessary. The will that was read after my death was a fiction, or at least an incomplete truth. A test, if you will, though I imagine you'll have harsher words for it. The vineyard has been in our family for generations, passed from father to son in an unbroken line. When your mother gave me a daughter, I was terrified. Not because you were any less precious, but because I didn't know how to prepare a girl for this world, for this business. And then Tom arrived, and the path seemed clear, again, traditional, expected. But you, Rebecca, you were never traditional. From the moment you could walk, you were exploring the vineyard, asking questions none of us had thought to ask, challenging practices we'd followed blindly for decades. You saw things differently. You were the future I hadn't known to hope for. As you grew, so did my certainty. Your education, your innovations during my illness, they confirmed what I'd suspected since you were small. You were the one who could truly lead Wilson Family Vineyards into a new era. Not just maintain it, but transform it. But transformation doesn't come without resistance. The vineyard, the family, our name, all of it was tied to outdated traditions. That would have suffocated your vision. You needed to break free, to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that your success wasn't tied to your inheritance, but to your own remarkable talents. So I created a scenario that would force you to leave, to find your wings without the safety net of the Wilson name. Harsh, perhaps. Cruel, you might say. But necessary. In the second envelope, you'll find the real will, the legal document that supersedes what was read a year ago. It states that 1 year following my death, if you have established yourself independently in the wine industry, control of Wilson Family Vineyards passes to you. Not a stipend, not a courtesy position. Full ownership and control. The choice of what to do with it is now yours. Keep it separate from your new venture. Sell it, transform it. The decision belongs to you, as it always should have. Your mother knows nothing of this arrangement. Tom and Elizabeth believe what they were told. Only Mr. Jenkins was aware and sworn to secrecy until this moment. Whatever you decide, know this. I see you, Firebird. I always did. And I am immensely proud of the woman, the winemaker, the visionary you've become, with or without the Wilson name. With love and admiration, your father. I read the letter 3 times, emotions cycling through me too rapidly to name. Anger at the manipulation, vindication at his recognition, confusion about his methods, pride in his confidence. And beneath it all, a simmering question. What now? With shaking hands, I opened the second envelope. The legal document inside was clear and binding. Wilson Family Vineyards, the land, the business, the legacy, all of it was mine. Effective immediately. Mr. Jenkins knocked softly before re-entering. One look at my face told him I'd read everything. Your father was quite confident in his assessment of your character, he said quietly. He believed you would succeed on your own terms. I folded the papers carefully, buying time as I sorted through my tumbling thoughts. Did he consider what would happen to Tom and Liz when this was revealed? The disruption to their lives? Mr. Jenkins's expression softened slightly. He made provisions. They'll receive generous settlements, though significantly less than they currently believe they're entitled to. Your father was firm in his conviction that the vineyard itself belongs in your hands. And if I hadn't flown, as he put it, if I'd stayed in Vermont, married well, played the role expected of me, then the original will would have remained in effect. Your father believed you needed the right circumstances to become who you truly are. He created those circumstances. I wanted to be angry at the manipulation, at being forced into exile to prove myself worthy of what should have been my birthright. But beneath that anger was a reluctant understanding. Had I inherited the vineyard without leaving, would I have had the courage to transform it? Or would I have been constrained by tradition, by family expectations, by the weight of the Wilson name? By forcing me to build something from nothing, my father had given me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that I could succeed on my own terms, by my own rules. What will you do now? Mr. Jenkins asked, watching me carefully. I tucked the documents into my bag and stood suddenly certain. First, I'm going to the Northwest Wine Showcase to represent Second Chance Cellars. Then I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with my family. As I walked out of his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. How did it go? Any family drama I need to prepare legal defenses for? I smiled, typing back, You have no idea. I'll explain everything soon. But first, I need to make sure our showcase preparations are perfect. Because regardless of what happened with the Wilson Vineyard, Second Chance Cellars was mine, created by my hands, my vision, my determination. Whatever came next would be on my terms. And as for my family, they were about to learn what I'd known all along. That sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't what's passed down to you, but what you build for yourself. I spent the week after my father's funeral walking the vineyard alone. The March air was still frigid, but I needed to feel the dormant vines beneath my fingers, to remind myself that even in death, life waits for renewal. The family estate felt hollow, filled with voices that spoke around me rather than to me, as though my grief was somehow less significant than theirs. My mother retreated into planning, meticulous arrangements for a memorial dinner, carefully selected flower arrangements, personalized notes to business associates. Liz busied herself with the guest rooms, preparing for distant relatives who would arrive with solemn faces and hushed voices. Tom locked himself in our father's office, emerging only for meals, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. I was assigned small tasks, meaningless busy work that kept me visible but peripheral. Becca, would you check if we have enough wine glasses? Becca, can you pick up the printed programs? Always the errands, never the decisions. The morning after Mr. Jenkins read the will, I found Tom in the winery's lab, reviewing production notes with Marcus, our longtime vintner. They fell silent when I entered, an awkward pause hanging in the air. "Don't stop on my account," I said, reaching for a lab coat. "I was just going to check on the new Chardonnay batch." Tom cleared his throat. "Actually, Becca, I've already done that, and I've made some decisions about the aging process." I froze, one arm in the sleeve. "What decisions?" "We discussed extending the barrel time by 3 months based on the acidity levels." Marcus looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. He'd been with Wilson Vineyard since before I was born, had taught me how to test sugar levels when I was tall enough to reach the countertops. "Tom thinks," he began. "I've decided," Tom interrupted, "that we'll bottle on the original schedule. The distributors are expecting it, and I don't want to disrupt our commitments. But the flavor profile would benefit significantly from Becca." My brother's voice wasn't unkind, just firm, final. "I understand you've got theories from your coursework, but this is how we've always done it. Dad's methods built this business, and they're not changing now." I swallowed hard, removed the lab coat, and hung it carefully on its hook. "These aren't theories, Tom. They're evidence-based improvements I implemented last year while Dad was recovering. The limited batch we produced with extended aging sold out in 2 weeks and received the highest ratings we've ever had." Tom's expression flickered, surprise, then something harder to read. "That was a novelty release, a one-off. It's not our brand." "It could be, it should be. We have an opportunity to evolve." "Dad just died," he cut in, voice rising slightly. "This isn't the time for your experiments. We need stability, continuity. The Wilson tradition matters more than ever now." Marcus became suddenly fascinated with his clipboard, edging toward the door. "I'll just check on the bottling line." When we were alone, I tried once more. "Tom, I've prepared a proposal, a 5-year plan that would gradually update our methods while honoring our heritage. I've run the numbers, tracked market trends, even lined up potential new distribution channels. If you'd just look at it." "Stop." He wasn't yelling, which somehow made it worse. His voice was tired, dismissive. "Just stop, Becca. I know you mean well, but this isn't a classroom project. This is our family legacy, and Dad left it to me for a reason." "What reason?" The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and painful. Tom's expression softened slightly. "Because he knew I'd protect what he built. What generations of Wilson men built." There it was, not spoken maliciously, just as a simple truth. Generations of Wilson men, not women, never women. I have a degree in viticulture. I've studied sustainable farming practices, modern fermentation techniques. I've published research on, and that's great, really. Tom placed a hand on my Shoulder. You can help with tours, with tastings, with marketing if you want. Use all that knowledge to tell our story. But the vineyard decisions, the business decisions, those are mine now. The weight of his hand felt like a brand, marking me as lesser, as other. I shrugged it off. I'll have my proposal on your desk tomorrow morning, I said quietly. All I ask is that you read it. That's all. He sighed. Fine. But Becca, try to remember that some things are meant to stay the same. I spent that night refining my presentation, polishing every slide, triple-checking every figure. This wasn't just about wine or business practices. It was about my place in the family, in the legacy. If I could make Tom see the potential, if I could convince him that evolution wasn't betrayal, maybe there was still a place for me that mattered. The next morning, I placed a leather portfolio on his desk before anyone else had arrived. Inside was my vision for Winston Family Vineyards, a careful balance of tradition and innovation, of honoring our history while securing our future. I'd included quotes from articles about changing consumer preferences, statistical analyses of our sales by demographic, and detailed projections for 3 new wine varieties that would complement our existing line. I'd even created mock-ups of redesigned labels that kept our historic crest, but refreshed the typography and color palette. Not radical changes, just thoughtful ones. Evolution, not revolution. All day I waited for Tom to mention it. During breakfast, during the meeting with the distributors, during the family dinner. He never did. 3 days passed in silence. When I finally gathered the courage to ask, he glanced up from his desk with a distracted frown. Oh, right. Your proposal. He shuffled some papers, not meeting my eyes. I took a look. There are some interesting ideas, but the timing's not right. Maybe next year when things have settled. His dismissal stung, but I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Which parts did you find interesting? The sustainable farming transition? The small batch premium series? The tasting room renovation? Tom's expression made it clear he'd read none of it. Maybe skimmed the executive summary at best. Look, Becca, I've got a lot on my plate. Taking over after Dad, keeping the business, stable. Your suggestions will have to wait. I took a deep breath. What about a trial run? One small batch, produced with my methods. If it fails, I'll never bring it up again. He laughed, not unkindly, but in that big brother way that had always made me feel small. Always so persistent. Dad used to say you were like a terrier with a bone. I'd never heard my father say anything of the sort. In fact, I'd rarely heard him say much about me at all. Before Tom could dismiss me again, I pressed on. One batch, Tom. What's the harm? He sighed, leaning back in our father's chair. Fine. One small batch, but it can't interfere with our regular production, and you'll handle everything yourself. I can't spare the staff for experiments. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. A chance to prove myself, to show that my ideas weren't just theoretical, but practical, profitable. Thank you, I said, and meant it. You won't regret this. For the next 2 months, I poured everything into my project. I selected a plot of Cabernet vines on the eastern slope, implemented organic growing practices, and meticulously documented every decision. I stayed up late reading research papers, consulting with former classmates now working at renowned wineries, refining my approach. I hired 2 part-time workers with my own savings when Tom refused to allocate staff. I purchased specialized equipment that our winery lacked, again out of my own pocket. I converted a small storage room into a secondary lab where I could monitor fermentation without disrupting the main production. My mother watched my frenzy with concerned eyes. You're working too hard, darling. Your father always said wine needs patience more than effort. I'm not just making wine, Mom. I'm making a statement. She patted my cheek in that distracted way of hers. Just don't exhaust yourself trying to prove something to people who aren't looking for proof. I should have heeded her warning, but determination blinded me. I was creating something special. Wine that respected our terroir, but employed techniques that would elevate it beyond anything Wilson Vineyards had produced before. The day I finally bottled my batch, just 50 cases of what I'd named Phoenix Reserve, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The wine was exceptional. Every test confirmed it, every tasting note promising. This was my vindication, my proof that I belonged in this business not as a tour guide, but as a winemaker, an innovator, a leader. I scheduled a private tasting with Tom, Liz, and her husband James, my moment of truth. I prepared documentation of every step, cost analyses showing that while my methods were initially more expensive, the premium pricing the wine could command would more than compensate. I even created a marketing plan for introducing a reserve line that would elevate our brand while keeping our traditional wines as the foundation. I set everything up in the formal tasting room, the one usually reserved for VIP clients. Crystal, glasses, proper lighting, temperature-controlled serving. Professional, polished, perfect. They arrived 30 minutes late. "Sorry, Becca," Liz said breezily, dropping her designer handbag on a chair. "We had a call with the Ashford hotel chain about carrying our standard red. Potential big account." I nodded, hiding my disappointment that they hadn't thought to include me in such a meeting. "No problem. I appreciate you making time for this." Tom checked his watch. "We've got about 20 minutes before I need to head back to the office for another call." "This shouldn't take long," I assured him, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want you to taste what I've created and look over the production notes." I poured the wine, demonstrating the proper technique, explaining the unique characteristics they should notice. "You'll find more complexity on the palate than our usual Cabernet. Notes of black cherry and dark chocolate up front, with hints of tobacco and leather on the finish. The tannins are present but well integrated due to the extended aging in French oak." "It's nice," Liz interrupted, barely having taken a sip. "A bit strong for my taste, but nice." James, her husband, swirled his glass with the exaggerated motion of someone who considers himself a connoisseur, but lacks genuine knowledge. "Interesting. Different from the Wilson style, though, isn't it? More like those California wines everyone's going crazy about." His tone made different sound like a flaw, not a feature. Tom at least took his time, tasting properly, considering. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. "It's well made," he finally said. "I'll give you that. But James is right. It doesn't taste like a Wilson wine. Our customers expect a certain profile from us, Becca. This would confuse the brand." I pushed the marketing materials forward. "That's why I'm proposing a separate reserve line. Different label, premium positioning. It wouldn't dilute the main brand. It would elevate it, create an aspirational tier." Liz raised an eyebrow. "Seems complicated and expensive to market." "I've run the numbers," I said, sliding the cost analysis across the table. The return on investment would be substantial by year 2, and it would attract a younger, affluent demographic we're currently missing. Tom glanced at my carefully prepared documents but didn't pick them up. "Becca, I appreciate the effort, really. It's a good wine. But it's not right for Wilson Vineyards." "You haven't even looked at the data," I said, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. "I've shown that this approach could increase our profit margins by 18% while using less than a quarter of our production capacity. It's sustainable, it's scalable, and it would differentiate us in an increasingly competitive market." "The Wilson name already differentiates us," James said, straightening his expensive tie. "No offense, Becca, but you're overcomplicating things. The business model has worked for 3 generations. If it ain't broke, don't fix it." "But it is breaking," I insisted. "Our market share has declined 6% in the last 3 years. Our average customer age has increased from 42 to 57. We're losing relevance, and if we don't adapt... Enough! Tom's voice was sharp. This isn't a board meeting, and you're not the CEO. You had your experiment, and while the wine is fine, it's not the direction we're taking. End of discussion. Liz, perhaps sensing the tension, attempted to soften the blow. It really is a lovely wine, Becca. Maybe you could sell it to your friends, or serve it at those wine club meetings you go to? Make a few bottles for personal use? Personal use. Like a hobby project, not a serious business proposition from a qualified professional. I gathered my documents with steady hands, though inside I was shaking. Thank you for your time. Don't take it personally, Tom said, already standing to leave. It's just business. But that was the problem. It wasn't business. If it had been about business, about profits, market trends, consumer data, my proposal would have merited real consideration. Instead, it was about family dynamics, about tradition masking entitlement, about my gender making me inherently unsuitable for leadership regardless of my qualifications. Later that afternoon, I found Tom in the main cellar, discussing the upcoming bottling schedule with the production team. He smiled when he saw me, as though our earlier conversation had been nothing significant. Becca, good timing. We need someone to handle the Mother's Day event planning. Lots of tours, tastings, the usual. Liz usually does it, but she's got that charity thing, and you've always had a knack for the hospitality side. The hospitality side, not the winemaking side, not the business side. I was being relegated to party planning while my carefully crafted wine, my proof of concept, would likely be poured down a drain or hidden away in some forgotten corner of the cellar. What about my Cabernet? I asked quietly. Tom looked genuinely confused for a moment, then his expression cleared. Oh, right. Well, like I said, it's not quite our style. But hey, good effort. Maybe next time try something closer to our established profile. Next time. As if there would be a next time. As if I hadn't poured months of work and thousands of dollars of my own money into a project he dismissed after one cursory tasting. And the bottles, I pressed. He shrugged. We can use them for cooking wine, I guess. Or staff gifts at Christmas. Cooking wine. My premium reserve Cabernet, with its carefully balanced tannins and complex flavor profile, reduced to something to be simmered away in pasta sauce. Staff gifts, as if it weren't good enough to sell under the Wilson name. Something broke inside me then. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, but quietly, definitively. A severance. A letting go. See, I said simply. That night I sat alone on the porch swing where I'd spent so many childhood evenings, looking out over the vineyard my great-grandfather had planted. The vines were just beginning to bud, tiny promises of fruit that would never reach their full potential under Tom's stubborn adherence to outdated methods. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Elena, a former classmate now working as a consultant for wineries in the Pacific Northwest. How did the tasting go? Did Big Bro finally see your genius? I stared at her message for a long time before responding. They suggested I use it for cooking. The phone rang seconds later. Tell me you're joking, Elena said when I answered. Wish I was. That's insane. Your thesis on fermentation techniques was published in Viticulture Today. You interned at Chateau Margaux. You literally wrote the business plan that saved 3 boutique wineries from bankruptcy during your consulting days. I sighed, watching the sunset paint the vineyard in golden light. None of that matters here. I'm just the little sister playing winemaker. Then stop playing their game, Elena said firmly. The industry is changing, Becca. Women are leading some of the most innovative wineries in the country. Your talent is wasted there. It's my family legacy too, I said, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Is it? Seems to me they've made it clear it's Tom's legacy, not yours. Sometimes family is just geography and genetics. Sometimes your real legacy is what you build, not what you inherit. Her words lodged in my heart like splinters, painful but impossible to ignore. There's an opportunity out here, she continued, her voice gentler now. A small production facility available, for lease in the Willamette Valley. Perfect for someone looking to start small but with high-quality output. The owner's a friend of mine, retiring next month. He's looking for someone with vision, not just capital. I don't have much capital, I admitted. Most of my savings went into the Phoenix Reserve project. But you have vision and skill. And honestly, Becca, you need to get out of there before they convince you that you're less than you are. I promised to think about it, but as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I knew my decision was already made. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the clarity that comes when you finally acknowledge what you've known all along. Sometimes the place you're from isn't the place you belong. The next morning, I boxed up my personal belongings from my small office near the tasting room. It didn't take long. A few books, a framed diploma, a collection of soil samples from wine regions I'd visited during my studies. The essentials I could fit in my car. The rest would stay behind, like so much of myself had all these years. I found my mother in the garden, pruning roses with the same precise care she applied to everything in her life. "I'm leaving," I said. Simply. She didn't look up, just clipped another stem with her silver shears. "For how long?" "I don't know. Maybe for good." That made her pause. She removed her gardening gloves slowly, her movements deliberate. "Because of Tom? He means well, Becca. He's just trying to honor your father's wishes. It's not just Tom. It's this place. There's no room for me here, not the real me, not the winemaker, the innovator. Just the dutiful daughter who gives tours and plans events." She finally looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "What will you do?" "Start over. Build something that's mine." "With what?" "Startups need capital. Connections. I have my education, my experience, my hands." I flexed my fingers, calloused from vineyard work, despite Tom's attempts to keep me in the tasting room. "That's more than great-grandfather had when he planted the first vines." She touched my cheek, her fingers cool against my skin. "You're stubborn, like him." "Like you," I corrected gently. "Dad always said you were the backbone of this place, even if your name was never on the bottles." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or regret. "He did say that, didn't he? But only to me. Never to the world." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the roses she'd tended for decades. Generations of Wilson women. Tending gardens while Wilson men tended vineyards. The pattern I was about to break. "Will you tell Tom?" she asked. "I left a letter and the keys to the lab." She nodded, then reached into her pocket and pressed something into my hand. It was her grandmother's ring, a simple band of twisted gold vines wrapped around a small pearl. "She wore this every day while she helped plant the original vineyard," my mother said quietly. "Your great-grandfather got all the credit, but she was the one who selected the rootstock, who insisted on the eastern slope for drainage. Take it. Remember where you come from even as you decide where you're going." I slipped the ring onto my finger, surprised by how perfectly it fit. "Thank you." "Be careful out there," she said, already turning back to her roses. "The wine world can be unkind to women who don't know their place." "I know my place." I told her. "It's just not here." I left without seeing Tom or Liz, without grand declarations or dramatic confrontations. I loaded my car with clothes, books, and 50 bottles of Phoenix Reserve Cabernet that I'd hidden in the old root cellar where Tom never ventured. As I drove down the long gravel driveway, past the wrought iron gates with their ornate W, I felt not grief, but a curious lightness. Behind me lay generations of Wilson tradition, of expectations and limitations. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. I checked into a hotel 30 miles away, not quite ready to leave Vermont entirely. That night, I opened one of my precious bottles of Phoenix Reserve and savored it slowly, appreciating the complexity, the balance, the hints of what might have been. Then I called Elena. "Tell me more about that production facility in Oregon," I said when she answered. "You're doing it? You're really leaving?" I took another sip of my wine, letting its boldness linger on my tongue. "I already have." The following morning, I booked a one-way ticket to Portland and began researching small business loans. I drafted a business plan on the hotel stationery, my vision no longer constrained by Wilson traditions or Tom's caution. Second chance sellers would focus on small batch, high-quality wines that honored traditional methods while embracing sustainable innovations. No family crest on the labels, no generations of history to uphold, just pure expression of terroir and technique. My technique. When my phone buzzed with Tom's name, I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he had to say, anger, confusion, belated apologies, it didn't matter now. I wasn't asking for his approval anymore. I wasn't asking for anything except the chance to prove myself on my own terms. The message he left was brief and predictable. "Becca, this is childish. Running away won't solve anything. Dad would be disappointed. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." Reasonable. Like accepting a stipend instead of a leadership role. Like using my education to conduct tours rather than create exceptional wines. Like pretending the Wilson name was enough when the Wilson vision had grown stagnant. I deleted the message without responding and turned back to my business plan. In 3 days, I would be in Oregon, starting over with nothing but my knowledge, my determination, and 50 bottles of proof that I was more than they believed me to be. That night, I slept better than I had in years, dreaming not of Wilson Vineyard's manicured rows and stately tasting room, but of something wilder, freer. A vineyard where innovation wasn't threatening, where my name, my full name, Rebecca Wilson, would stand for quality and vision, not tradition and constraints. In the morning, I mailed my letter of resignation to the official Wilson family, Vineyard's address, formally declining the stipend offered in my father's will. I didn't need their money, their approval, or their name. What I needed was 3,000 miles of distance and the chance to become the winemaker I knew I could be. As I prepared to leave Vermont behind, I felt not like someone losing her inheritance, but like someone finally claiming it, not an inheritance of land or money, but of passion, of purpose, of the courage to begin again. The Phoenix Reserve wine had been aptly named after all. From these ashes, something new would rise. Portland welcomed me with steady rain and slate-gray skies, a stark contrast to Vermont's clear, cold spring. I stepped out of the airport terminal, into the misty air, and took a deep breath. It smelled different here, evergreen and ocean, coffee and damp pavement. Nothing like the familiar scent of our vineyard soil after the morning dew. Nothing like home. Good. Elena met me at arrivals, her curly hair pinned back, wearing a raincoat emblazoned with the logo of her consulting firm. She hugged me tightly, then held me at arm's length, studying my face. "You look exhausted," she declared, "but also weirdly peaceful." "That's an accurate assessment," I admitted, hoisting my carry-on over my shoulder. My entire life had been distilled down to 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. The rest of my belongings would arrive by courier next week, including the carefully packed bottles of Phoenix Reserve, my only tangible evidence that I could create something exceptional. "Well, the exhausted part we can fix with coffee, the FI. Peaceful part we'll nurture with a solid plan." She grabbed my larger suitcase. "Cars this way. Welcome to your new life, Becca Wilson." The drive from Portland International to the small apartment Elena had helped me secure took us through the city's east side, past neighborhoods of craftsman homes, quirky storefronts, and more coffee shops than I could count. Everything felt different. The architecture, the pace, the very light filtering through the cloud cover. "So," Elena said as we stopped at a traffic light, "how bad was it? The fallout when you left?" I stared out the window, watching people hurry along the sidewalks under colorful umbrellas. There wasn't much fallout. That would have required them to take me seriously in the first place. Tom called eventually, though, right? To tell me I was being childish and disappointing our father's memory. I shrugged. Standard guilt trip. Nothing about recognizing my contribution or suggesting a real role at the vineyard. Elena shook her head. His loss, literally. Have you seen their latest ratings? I hadn't. I'd deliberately avoided wine industry publications needing clean mental space to envision my next steps without the shadow of Wilson Family Vineyards looming over me. Down 3 points across their portfolio, she continued. Nothing dramatic, but a clear downward trend. The reviews mention stagnation and failure to innovate. Sound familiar? A vindicating warmth spread through my chest, but I tamped it down. I hadn't come to Oregon to gloat over my family's struggles, but to build something of my own. Enough about Vermont, I said as we pulled up to a modest apartment building. Tell me about this production facility you mentioned. Elena's smile widened. Oh, you're going to love it. It's small but perfect for your vision. Henry's had it for 15 years, built it himself when he left Napa. All the equipment is well maintained, and the location is ideal. Easy access to some of the best Pinot Noir vineyards in the valley. What's the catch? I asked, practical as always. It's not cheap, and Henry's particular about who takes it over. He's turned down 3 potential buyers already. Large operations wanting to expand into Oregon. He says they'd industrialize his baby. I nodded, understanding the sentiment. Wine wasn't just a business. It was a calling, a craft, a connection to the land itself. Mass production often sacrificed soul for scale. When can I see it? Tomorrow morning? Tonight, you rest. Process. Start to feel like an Oregonian. My apartment was small but bright, with windows overlooking a tree-lined street. Elena had stocked the refrigerator with basics and left a bottle of local Pinot Noir on the counter with a note, "To new beginnings." The gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. After she left, promising to pick me up at 8 the next morning, I wandered around the space that would be my home for the foreseeable future. It was about the size of my childhood bedroom in the family mansion. No antique furniture, no original artwork, no heritage or history pressing down on every surface. Just clean lines, empty shelves, blank walls, a canvas waiting for my story to unfold. I opened Elena's wine and poured a glass, sipping it slowly as I unpacked the few personal items I'd brought. My diploma, a photograph of my mother in the core rose garden, the small pearl ring she'd given me when I left. I placed the ring on the windowsill where morning light would catch it, a small reminder of where I'd come from that didn't feel like a weight. That night, I slept on unfamiliar sheets in an unfamiliar city, 3,000 miles from the only home I'd ever known, and dreamed not of the past, but of the future. Rows of vines stretching toward mountains, bottles bearing labels I'd designed, a winery built on my terms. Morning came with weak sunlight filtered through lingering clouds. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Henry Lovett, the retiring winemaker whose facility might become the birthplace of second-chance sellers. Not in the designer clothes that had been my Vermont uniform, but in practical jeans, boots that could handle muddy terrain, and a simple sweater. A winemaker's clothes, not an heiress's. Elena arrived precisely at 8, carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee. Ready to meet your future? The drive to the facility took us out of Portland and into the rolling hills of Willamette Valley. As the urban landscape gave way to vineyards and orchards, something in my chest loosened. This was terroir I could learn, soil I could come to understand. Different from Vermont's, but perhaps better suited to the winemaker I wanted to become. Henry's production facility was tucked into a hillside, partially built into the earth itself, a design that naturally regulated temperature and humidity. It wasn't imposing or grand like Winston Family Vineyard's showcase winery. Instead, it was thoughtfully efficient, intimately scaled, with every element serving a purpose. Henry himself met us outside, a lean man in his 70s with sun-weathered skin and alert blue eyes. He wore work clothes with the easy comfort of someone who had never needed to impress others with his appearance. "You must be Rebecca," he said, extending a calloused hand. His grip was firm, assessing. "Becca," I corrected, meeting his gaze steadily. "Thank you for agreeing to show me your facility. Elena speaks highly of you, says you've got vision and skill." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Also says you're running from something." I appreciated his directness. Not running from, moving toward. A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Good answer. Let's see if this place might be worth moving toward." The tour was comprehensive. Henry showed me every aspect of his operation, from the crush pad to the lab to the barrel room, explaining modifications he'd made over the years, challenges of the space, quirks I should know about. It wasn't a sales pitch. It was more like the handover of a beloved project to a new caretaker. The equipment was older but impeccably maintained. The space was limited but intelligently designed for maximum efficiency. It wasn't anything like the vast, state-of-the-art facility I'd grown up in, but I could see its potential immediately. "What do you produce here?" I asked, as we entered the barrel room, where perhaps 50 oak barrels were arranged in neat rows. Small batch Pinot Noir primarily, some Chardonnay. A little experimental Gamay that keeps winning awards despite my best efforts to mess it up. He ran a hand along one of the barrels fondly. "Never more than 2,000 cases total, quality over quantity." "And your distribution?" "Local restaurants, a few specialty shops, direct to consumer through the website and wine club. Nothing national. Never wanted the headache of dealing with big distributors." I nodded, mentally calculating. A focused, premium operation with direct sales would have higher margins than a larger production sold through distributors. It could be viable, even starting small. After showing me the facility, Henry led us to a small deck overlooking the neighboring vineyard. 3 glasses and a bottle appeared from nowhere. "My 2018 Pinot Noir," he said, pouring generously. "Tell me what you think, and don't sugarcoat it because you want the facility." I took the glass, went through the proper tasting procedure, swirl, sniff, sip, assess, then set it down. It's beautiful, elegant. The acidity is perfectly balanced with the fruit. There's a mineral note on the finish that must come from the volcanic soil in this section of the valley. Henry watched me carefully. "And?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was the foundation I wanted for my new beginning. And I would have let it age another 3 months in barrel to develop more complexity in the middle palate. Instead of offense, Henry's face broke into a genuine smile. "Exactly what I told my assistant winemaker at the time, but we had a schedule to keep." He leaned forward. "Now tell me why you left Vermont. The real reason, not the glossy version." So I did. I told him about growing up in the shadow of Winston Family Vineyards, about my education and return, about the innovations I'd tried to implement during my father's illness. I told him about the will, the stipend, the relegation to tour guide despite my qualifications, and I told him about Phoenix Reserve, the wine that had been my proof of concept and my breaking point. When I finished, Henry was silent for a long moment, staring out at the vineyard with an unreadable expression. "I have 3 interested buyers," he finally said. A conglomerate from California that would turn this into another soulless tasting room on the wine trail. A wealthy tech executive who wants a vanity project but knows nothing about winemaking. And a established Oregon winery looking to expand their production capacity. He turned to look at me directly. All of them can pay more than you can, I'd wager. I nodded, not bothering to pretend otherwise. Probably. My resources are limited. But my commitment isn't. Limited resources can be an advantage, he said thoughtfully. Forces creativity, intentionality. I built this place with the proceeds from selling my stake in a Napa winery where I'd become just another employee, making wines by committee for focus groups and marketing teams. He refilled our glasses. I didn't build it to see it become that again under a new owner. Hope flickered in my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd rather sell to someone with the right vision than the right checkbook. But vision doesn't pay bills or maintain equipment. I have some savings, I said. Not enough to buy outright, but enough for a substantial down payment. And I've prepared a business plan for securing additional financing. Henry nodded slowly. Let's see it. Not now. Take a day, refine it based on what you've seen here. Meet me tomorrow, same time. Bring the business plan and a bottle of your Phoenix Reserve. If I'm going to bet on you, I want to taste your work. A day later, I returned with a polished business plan and one precious bottle of Phoenix Reserve. The business plan detailed my vision for second chance sellers. Small batch, premium wines focusing initially on Pinot Noir, but eventually expanding to include other varietals well suited to Oregon's climate. Direct-to-consumer sales would be the priority, building a loyal customer base through quality and personal connection rather than marketing budgets. Henry read every page, asking pointed questions about my projections, my production philosophy, my marketing strategy. Then he opened the Phoenix Reserve, tasting it with the focus and care of someone who had evaluated thousands of wines over decades in the industry. After a long, considered sip, he set down the glass and looked at me with new respect. You made this by yourself? From vineyard management through bottling? I nodded. Every step, against considerable obstacles. He took another sip, closing his eyes to focus on the flavors. It's excellent. Not perfect. There's a hint of greenness that suggests the fruit could have hung longer, and the oak integration could be more seamless. But excellent, especially for someone working essentially alone. Coming from him, the critique felt like exactly what it was: professional assessment, not personal dismissal. I agree with your assessment. The harvest timing was determined by the main production schedule, not my preferences, and I had limited control over the barrel selection. Henry nodded thoughtfully. And still you created this. Imagine what you could do with full control. Those words, full control, sent a shiver of anticipation through me. No brother looking over my shoulder, no family traditions limiting my choices, no father's shadow darkening my path. That's exactly what I intend to find out, I said quietly. Henry took one more sip of the Phoenix Reserve, then set down his glass with a decisive motion. I'm going to make you an offer, not the one you're expecting. My heart sank. Here was another man about to tell me what I could and couldn't do, what I was and wasn't worthy of. I'll sell you the equipment, the brand relationships I've built, the customer list, and lease you the facility for 3 years with an option to buy. The price will be 30% below market value. I blinked, stunned. Why would you do that? Because you remind me of myself 30 years ago. Because the wine industry needs more people with passion and fewer corporations with portfolios. And because I'm old enough to care more about legacy than maximum profit. It was an incredible opportunity. Still financially challenging, but potentially viable with the right loan structure. But there had to be a catch. What's the condition? I asked, certain there must be one. Henry smiled slightly. Smart girl? 2 conditions. First, you keep my assistant winemaker Miguel on staff for at least the first year. He's talented, knows this facility inside out, and deserves the chance to keep working here. That was easy enough to agree to. Having experienced help would be invaluable. And the second? I stay on as a consultant for the first vintage. No salary, just profit sharing on that initial release. I've spent 15 years building a reputation for quality from this facility. I want to ensure the transition maintains that standard. It wasn't control he wanted, it was continuity, protection of something he'd built, not limitation of what I could build. The distinction made all the difference. I accept both conditions, I said without hesitation, gratefully. We shook hands, and just like that, second chance sellers began to transform from dream to reality. The paperwork took weeks, the loan, applications even longer, but by early summer, I was the owner of winemaking equipment, a growing customer list, and a 3-year lease on a facility perfectly suited to my vision. Miguel, Henry's assistant winemaker, initially regarded me with suspicion. A 30-something woman from the East Coast with a prestigious last name she never used, I must have seemed like a dilettante playing at winemaking, another wealthy outsider treating Oregon as a trendy wine destination rather than a serious, viticultural region. That perception lasted exactly 3 days, until he found me at 5 a.m, already in the lab running analyses on soil samples from the vineyards where we'd be sourcing fruit. "You're here early," he said, surprise, evident in his voice. I looked up from the microscope where I was examining soil microorganisms. Harvest is 8 weeks away. We need baseline data on every vineyard block to make informed picking decisions. He leaned against the lab bench. Henry usually went by bricks levels and taste. Henry had 15 years of experience with these vineyards. I have none. Data gives me a starting point. Then I'll also rely on taste. Miguel watched me work for a moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll get the sample kit. There's a section of Cristom Vineyard you haven't tested yet." By the time harvest arrived, Miguel and I had developed a productive working relationship based on mutual respect. He knew the vineyards and the facility. I brought new techniques and perspectives. Together, we created a detailed plan for our first vintage: which blocks to harvest when, which fermentation approaches to use for different batches, which barrel. Selection would best complement each vineyard's fruit. Henry observed our preparations with minimal interference, offering advice only when asked, but watching everything with a critical eye. "You're ready," he declared the night before our first fruit was scheduled to arrive. "Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust the land to give you what it has to offer." That first harvest under the second chance seller's name was both exhausting and exhilarating. 18-hour days of physical labor, critical decisions, problem-solving on the fly when equipment hiccuped or fermentation took unexpected turns. I worked alongside Miguel and our small harvest crew, my hands stained purple, my back aching, my mind constantly calculating and adjusting. It was nothing like the harvests at Wilson Family Vineyards, where I'd been kept primarily in the lab, or worse, entertaining visitors while the real work happened elsewhere. Here, I was involved in every aspect, from the moment the fruit arrived until it was safely in barrels or tanks. At night, I fell into bed too tired to check emails or phone messages, much less respond to the increasingly frequent texts from my mother asking when I might visit. Vermont felt like another lifetime, another person. Here in Oregon, covered in grape must and making dozens of crucial decisions daily, I was becoming the winemaker I'd always known I could be. As autumn deepened, into winter and our wines developed quietly in barrels, I turned my attention to the business side of second chance sellers. The tasting room was modest, just a small converted space at the front of the production facility. But I transformed it into a welcoming environment that emphasized our winemaking philosophy rather than flashy decor. No ornate chandeliers or antique furniture like the Wilson tasting room. Instead, large windows overlooked the production area, allowing visitors to see the actual winemaking process. Cork flooring, reclaimed wood tables, and subtle lighting created a warm atmosphere where the wines could be the focus. The labels I designed were simple but distinctive. A rising phoenix in subtle gold against a deep blue background, the name Second Chance Cellars in clean typography beneath it. No family crests, no establishment dates meant to impress with longevity rather than quality. When the first wine club sign-up form arrived in the mail, a customer who had visited our still under construction tasting room and been impressed enough by barrel samples to commit to future purchases, I pinned it to the office wall. Proof that someone believed in what we were creating. By spring, word had begun to spread about the new winery in the Willamette Valley, with the promising barrel samples and the passionate young winemaker. Local food and wine bloggers requested visits. Restaurant sommeliers inquired about future availability. A small but growing list of wine club members sent encouraging notes along with their subscription forms. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was validation, evidence that I could build something meaningful without the Wilson name or resources behind me. Each small success felt earned in a way that nothing at the family vineyard ever had. Henry, true to his word, remained involved but not intrusive. He attended our blending sessions, offering opinions but respecting my final decisions. He introduced me to key industry contacts, vouching for my skill and vision. And he never once suggested that I should do things the way they've always been done. The phrase that had so often stifled innovation at Wilson Family Vineyards. As our first bottling day approached, I felt a mixture of pride and terror. These wines would be my debut as an independent winemaker, my statement to the industry and to myself. They had to be exceptional, distinctive, worthy of the risk I'd taken in leaving everything behind. The night before bottling, I stayed late at the winery, tasting through each barrel one final time. The Pinot Noir from Christom Vineyard was everything. I'd hoped, elegant but structured, with complex layers of fruit and earth that unfolded slowly on the palate. The Chardonnay from Durant Vineyard showed beautiful tension between richness and acidity, a perfect balance I'd strived for. As I made my final notes, I heard the door open behind me. Assuming it was Miguel returning for something forgotten, I didn't turn around. "We're ready," I said, still writing. "The Pinot's showing beautifully. I think we made the right call on that last blend adjustment." "I certainly hope so, considering what this little experiment of yours has cost the family." The voice froze me in place. Not Miguel. Tom. I turned slowly to find my brother standing in the doorway of the barrel room, looking out of place in his tailored suit and Italian loafers. His expression was a mixture of disapproval and curiosity as he surveyed the modest facility. "What are you doing here?" I asked, setting down my wine glass carefully. "Looking for you, obviously." He stepped further into the room, running a finger along one of the barrels. "You're not easy to find when you change your phone number and ignore emails. That was intentional." He sighed, the sound achingly familiar, the exasperated older brother dealing with a difficult sibling. "Mom's worried. You barely call. You didn't come home for Christmas." "This is home now," I said simply. Tom's gaze swept the barrel room, again taking in the hand-labeled barrels, the modest equipment, the clear lack of the luxury touches that defined Wilson Family Vineyards. This is what you left a multi-generation family business for? A rented facility making what? A few hundred cases? 1,200 this vintage, I corrected. Quality over quantity. "Spin it however you want, Becca. You had a tantrum and ran away because we wouldn't let you change generations of successful tradition overnight." The accusation should have stung, but instead, I felt a surprising calm. 6 months ago, I might have defended myself vehemently, tried to make him understand what he'd thrown away by dismissing my contributions. Now, standing amid barrels of wine I'd created entirely on my own terms, I didn't need his validation. "Why are you really here, Tom? It's not to check on my well-being." He straightened his already perfect tie. There have been some challenges at the vineyard, distribution issues, marketing problems. The new winemaker isn't working out as expected. And we're considering some changes, modernization, you might call it. The admission clearly cost him something in pride. Your name came up in discussions. I almost laughed. After dismissing every suggestion I'd ever made, after relegating me to tour guide despite my qualifications, after making it clear that being a Wilson woman meant standing in the background while Wilson men led, now they wanted my expertise? What exactly are you offering? A real position, director of winemaking, full creative control over a new premium line we're developing, a seat at the management table. He spread his hands magnanimously. Everything you wanted. Everything I'd wanted, past tense. What I wanted now was standing all around me, my own venture, built with my own hands, following my own vision. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I've made commitments here. To my business partners, to our growers, to our early customers. Tom's expression hardened. Business partners? You mean that old man who's letting you play winemaker in his retirement facility? Becca, this isn't real. It's a hobby, an extended vacation from responsibility. It's time to come home and take your proper place in the family business. My proper place. The phrase ignited a slow burn of anger in my chest. My proper place is wherever I create it, Tom. Not where you or Dad or tradition dictates it should be. Don't be stubborn. You've made your point. Now be practical. I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the Pinot Noir gently. Have you tasted any of our barrel samples? He blinked at the apparent non sequitur. What? No, I just arrived. This afternoon. Try this. I poured a small amount into a clean glass and handed it to him. Christum Vineyard Pinot Noir, East Slope, whole cluster fermentation with 20% New French oak. Tom took the glass automatically, his business training making the evaluation of wine a reflexive action regardless of the circumstances. He went through the motions, swirl, sniff, sip, then paused, genuine surprise crossing his features. He tasted again, more carefully this time. This is impressive, he admitted reluctantly. Better than I expected. Better than Wilson Family Vineyards Pinot Noir? I pressed. He frowned. That's not a fair comparison. Different regions, different grape clones, different winemaking approaches. Exactly, different approaches. I gestured around us. Everything here is a choice I made, Tom. Every vineyard partnership, every fermentation decision, every barrel selection. For the first time in my life, I'm creating exactly what I believe in, not just following someone else's formula. And that's worth throwing away your inheritance? Your family legacy? I thought of my mother's ring, still sitting on my apartment windowsill where morning light could catch it. Of the family name I'd chosen not to use in my new venture. Of the traditions that had shaped me, even as I pushed against them. I'm not throwing away anything meaningful, I said quietly. I'm building something new while honoring what matters from the past. That's evolution, not rejection. Tom set down his glass with a sharp click. Poeticize it however you want. The offer stands until the end of the month. Director of winemaking, creative control, management role. Think about it seriously, Becca. This little project might feel satisfying now, but it can't compare to what Wilson Family Vineyards can offer you. He left without another word, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing on the concrete floor. I remained in the barrel room, surrounded by the fruits of my independent vision, feeling strangely undisturbed by his visit. 6 months ago, his offer might have tempted me. The validation, the resources, the chance to transform the family business from within. Now, it felt like a step backward. Second Chance Cellars wasn't just a point to prove or a temporary rebellion. It was becoming something real, something mine, something that reflected my values and vision in ways that Winston Family Vineyards never could, even with the title and authority Tom was suddenly willing to offer. The next morning, as the bottling line hummed with activity and the first wines of Second Chance Cellars were sealed and labeled, I felt a certainty that transcended the lingering voices of doubt. This was where I belonged. This was the path forward. Tom's offer remained unanswered as April turned to May, as the bottled wines rested before release, as the vines of our partner vineyards began their new season of growth. Second Chance Cellars was no longer just a dream or an escape. It was a living, breathing entity with a future stretching before it like the rows of vines ascending the Oregon hillsides. My future, on my terms. The first official release day for Second Chance Cellars arrived on a perfect Oregon summer morning. Sunlight filtered through high clouds, casting a gentle glow over the modest tasting room we'd prepared for the occasion. I'd been awake since 4, checking and rechecking every detail. The wines at perfect serving temperature, the simple food pairings arranged on slate boards, the staff briefed on the story behind each bottle. Not the story of my exodus from Winston Family Vineyards. That remained private, known only to Elena, Henry, and Miguel. But the story of the vineyards we'd partnered with, the winemaking decisions that had shaped each wine, the philosophy behind Second Chance Cellars itself. These were the narratives that mattered now. "Nervous?" Henry asked, appearing beside me as I adjusted a display of our signature Pinot Noir, the Phoenix label catching the light. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if no one comes? What if they come but don't like the wines? What if the sun explodes and none of it matters?" Henry finished with a wry smile. "Save your worry for things you can control. The wines are exceptional. You know that, I know that, Miguel knows that. The rest will follow." He was right, of course. We'd done blind tastings with industry professionals, all of whom had responded enthusiastically. Wine club members who'd received advance bottles had sent glowing emails. Even the local wine columnist who'd visited last week had given hints of a positive review to come. But this was different. This was opening our doors to the public, inviting judgment not just on our wines, but on the entire venture I'd staked my future on. 5 minutes, Miguel called from behind the small bar we'd constructed from reclaimed barrel staves. "Should I unlock the door?" I took a deep breath, smoothed my simple linen dress, so different from the designer outfits that had been my uniform at Winston events, and nodded. "Let's do this." The first visitors arrived precisely at opening, a middle-aged couple who'd discovered our website and driven from Seattle specifically for our release. They were followed by a small group of local wine enthusiasts, then a young sommelier from Portland who'd heard rumors about our barrel samples. By noon, the tasting room hummed with conversation and the gentle clink of glasses. I moved among the guests, pouring wines, answering questions, sharing the precise details of our winemaking approach that visitors to Winston Family Vineyards had never seemed interested in. Here, people leaned in when I talked about whole cluster, fermentation techniques, or our approach to barrel selection. They asked intelligent questions about vineyard management and aging potential. They treated me not as a tour guide, but as a winemaker, a creator, a professional with expertise worth hearing. "This Pinot is remarkable," the Seattle woman told me as her husband purchased a full case. "So elegant, but with depth. We've been collecting Oregon wines for 20 years, and this is among the most promising debuts we've seen." By day's end, we'd sold nearly 2/3 of our projected first-month inventory and added 43 names to our wine club list. As the last guests departed and we began clearing glasses, I felt a warm mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Second Chance Cellars wasn't just a personal statement anymore. It was a viable business with appreciative customers and promising momentum. "Told you," Henry said, handing me a glass of our Chardonnay as we collapsed into chairs on the small patio behind the tasting room. "The wines speak for themselves." "With a little help from our marketing efforts," Elena added, joining us with her own glass. That write-up in Oregon Wine Press last week didn't hurt, and your Instagram strategy is absolutely connecting with younger wine lovers. I nodded, grateful for Elena's guidance on the business side. While Winston Family Vineyards relied almost exclusively on their established name and traditional distribution channels, we'd embraced a more dynamic approach. Direct consumer relationships, thoughtful social media presence, intimate tasting experiences that educated as well as entertained. Speaking of marketing, Elena continued, setting down her glass, have you decided about the Northwest Wine Showcase next month? The application deadline is Friday. The showcase was the region's most prestigious wine event, featuring established producers alongside carefully selected newcomers. Getting accepted would put second-chance sellers on the map in a significant way, but the selection committee was notoriously demanding, and the entry fee would strain our still-limited budget. I've been wavering, I admitted. It's a big investment for a new winery, and there's no guarantee we'd be accepted. Henry snorted. They'd be fools to turn you down. Your wines stand up against producers with decades more experience. Take the risk. Risk. It had become a familiar companion over the past year. Leaving Vermont, investing my savings, leasing the facility, all risks that had demanded courage but were beginning to show rewards. Perhaps this was just the next step on that path. I'll submit the application tomorrow, I decided. But we'll need to be strategic about which wines we enter. The Christum Vineyard Pinot for sure, maybe the Durant Chardonnay. As we discussed options, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. I almost ignored it, wrapped in the warm cocoon of the day's success, but the subject line caught my eye. Winston Family Vineyards announces leadership changes. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened the industry newsletter alert. The article was brief but impactful. Thomas Wilson had stepped down as head winemaker at Winston Family Vineyards, remaining as CEO but hiring an acclaimed winemaker from California to usher in a new era of innovation while honoring the Wilson tradition of excellence. Innovation. The very thing I'd been told had no place at Winston Family Vineyards when I proposed it. Everything okay? Elena asked, noticing my expression. I passed her the phone silently. She scanned the article, eyebrows rising. Well. Looks like someone realized they'd made a mistake. Too little. Too late. Is it satisfaction you're feeling or regret? Henry asked quietly, watching me with those perceptive blue eyes that seemed to see beneath surfaces. Neither, I realized, somewhat surprised by my own emotional response. It's confirmation. They're finally acknowledging what I saw 2 years ago, that they needed to evolve. But they're bringing in an outsider instead of recognizing the vision they had within their own family. Their loss, Miguel said firmly, joining our circle with a bottle of our reserve Pinot. Our gain. Our gain. The simple phrase resonated deeply. Had I stayed, fighting for incremental changes within the constraints of Wilson traditions, I might never have discovered what I was truly capable of creating. Second Chance Cellars wasn't a compromise or a consolation prize. It was becoming exactly what I'd envisioned, perhaps more. I raised my glass in a small toast. To confirmation, then, and to moving forward, not looking back. The Northwest Wine Showcase acceptance arrived 2 weeks later, not just for one wine, but for all 3 we'd submitted. The email included a personal note from the selection committee chair. Particularly impressed by your Pinot Noir, looking forward to introducing Second Chance Cellars to the wider wine community. Preparation for the showcase consumed the following weeks. We designed a simple but elegant booth, printed informational materials that emphasized our winemaking philosophy rather than heritage or history, and carefully set aside our best bottles for the event. The morning of the showcase, I dressed. With deliberate care, Professional but approachable in a deep blue blazer over simple black, a small silver phoenix pin my only adornment. As I fastened it to my lapel, I thought of the Wilson family crest pin my father had given me on my 16th birthday, now tucked away in a drawer in my apartment. Different symbols for different chapters of my life. The Portland Convention Center buzzed with activity as exhibitors set up their booths. Established Oregon wineries with decades of history occupied prime locations near the entrance. Their elaborate displays featuring awards, accolades, and family photographs spanning generations. Our small booth, positioned in the section reserved for newer producers, was modest by comparison. But the wines inside our coolers needed no elaborate trappings to speak their truth. "Ready?" Miguel asked as we arranged the last details, his usual quiet confidence a steadying presence. "As I'll ever be." I straightened a stack of business cards bearing the Phoenix logo. "Remember, we're not just pouring wine today. We're introducing people to our vision. Quality, transparency, respect for tradition, but openness to innovation. In other words, everything your family's business wasn't," he observed with surprising insight. "Everything it could have been," I corrected. Gently, but yes. The doors opened and the day became a blur of conversations, tastings, connections. Sommeliers, wine retailers, journalists, and enthusiasts stopped by our booth in a steady stream, drawn initially by curiosity about a new producer, then lingering over the quality in their glasses. I explained our approach countless times, answered technical questions, accepted compliments with grateful humility, and collected more business cards than I could count. Midway through the afternoon, during a rare quiet moment, I stepped away briefly to stretch my legs and survey the event. As I walked the aisles, noting which booths attracted the most attention and how different wineries presented themselves, a familiar voice stopped me cold. "Their Syrah is exceptional, but you really must try the Pinot from that new producer in the East section, Second Chance Cellars. Remarkable structure, distinctive character without being showy." I turned to find an influential wine blogger, speaking to a small group, gesturing in the direction of our booth. Recommending our wine to strangers, unprompted. Pride warmed me as I continued my circuit of the hall, moving carefully to avoid the crowded Wilson Family Vineyards display near the entrance. I had no desire for awkward encounters with my brother or sister on a day meant for celebrating Second Chance Cellars' emergence. But as I rounded a corner, I nearly collided with a tall figure studying a winery map. "I'm so sorry," I began automatically, then froze as I recognized James, my sister Liz's husband. He looked up, surprise, then recognition crossing his face. "Becca? My God, it is you. Liz said you'd moved out west, but I had no idea." "That I was making wine?" I finished when he hesitated. "Yes, I am. Successfully, it turns out." James had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Listen, about how things went down after your father's—" "It's ancient history," I cut in, not wanting to revisit old wounds. "I'm here representing my winery, Second Chance Cellars. We're in booth E42 if you'd like to taste what I've been working on." His eyebrows rose. "Your Second Chance Cellars? I just heard someone raving about your Pinot. Said it was the find of the showcase." "That's gratifying to hear," I managed, fighting back a smile. "Will Liz and Tom be here today?" "Tom's tied up with the new winemaker. Orientation week. But Liz is around somewhere." He glanced over his shoulder. "Look, what happened with the will and everything. It wasn't personal. It was just tradition." "I'm aware," I said simply, "and it all worked out for the best, as it turns out. My booth is E42 if you'd like to draw your own conclusions about whether tradition is always the wisest path." I walked away before he could respond, heart pounding but head high. The encounter had been brief but significant, my first contact. With the family in over a year, and I'd faced it with confidence rather than resentment. Progress, perhaps. Back at our booth, I found Miguel handling a small crowd of interested tasters. I slipped in beside him, resuming my role of winemaker and proprietor, pushing thoughts of the Wilson legacy firmly aside. This day wasn't about the past. It was about establishing Second Chance Cellars' future. As the showcase drew to a close, the event organizer stopped by with a small gold seal. "For your Christum Vineyard Pinot Noir," she explained, handing it to me. Selected as a showcase standout by our judging panel. Only 10 wines from the entire event received this recognition. Miguel's eyes widened as I accepted the seal with shaking hands. "That's incredible," I managed. "Thank you." "No, need to thank us. The wine earned it." She smiled warmly. "We'll be watching Second Chance Cellars with great interest. Congratulations." As soon as she left, Miguel grabbed my shoulders in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. "Do you understand? What just happened? 10 wines out of hundreds. Most wineries wait years for that recognition." The validation felt almost overwhelming, not just of my winemaking, but of every decision that had led me to this moment. Leaving Wilson Family Vineyards had been necessary, but also terrifying. There had been so many moments of doubt, of wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake in walking away from a guaranteed position, however limited, in an established business. Now, holding tangible proof that my wines could stand on their own merits, those doubts seemed distant and dim. We celebrated that evening with Elena and Henry at a small restaurant near the convention center, sharing a bottle of our award-winning Pinot with the meal. As we raised glasses in toast, I felt a curious sense of completion. Not of the journey itself, which was just beginning, but of a circle that had started the day I left Vermont. "To Second Chance Cellars," Elena declared, and to Becca Wilson, who knew her own worth even when others didn't. "I'll drink to that," Henry agreed, "but the best is yet to come." He was right. The showcase recognition proved to be a catalyst. Within days, orders began flowing in from restaurants and wine shops that had tasted our offerings at the event. The gold seal on our Pinot Noir bottles drew customers to our tasting room in record numbers. Wine club membership doubled, then tripled. We were still small, tiny compared to Wilson Family Vineyards, but we were now unquestionably viable, with a trajectory pointing firmly upward. As harvest approached again, I found myself facing new challenges, managing growth while maintaining quality, considering expanded production without compromising our hands-on approach. These were good problems to have, evidence of success rather than survival. One warm September evening, as I walked the rows of Christum Vineyard checking ripeness levels and making harvest plans, my phone rang with a Vermont number I didn't recognize. Normally, I might have let it go to voicemail, but something, intuition perhaps, made me answer. "Rebecca Wilson?" An unfamiliar male voice, formal but not unfriendly. "Yes, this is she." "This is Walter Jenkins, your father's attorney. I apologize for the unexpected call, but there's a matter of some importance we need to discuss." My hand tightened on the phone. Jenkins had handled my father's will, had overseen the reading that had left me with nothing but a stipend and a subordinate role. What could he possibly need to discuss now, nearly 2 years later? "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "Not over the phone, I'm afraid. This requires an in-person meeting. I understand you're in Oregon now, but I'm hoping you might be able to return to Vermont at your earliest convenience. There are documents that must be reviewed in person." A flicker of unease ran through me. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm preparing for harvest. It's the busiest time of the year for a winemaker. Whatever this is about, can it wait until winter?" There was a pause. Then, "I'm afraid not. Your father left specific instructions about timing. The matter must be addressed before the second anniversary of his passing." My father's specific instructions, the same ones that had left me with a token role while handing the family business to Tom. I had little interest in whatever additional stipulations or limitations he might have attached to my meager inheritance. Mr. Jenkins, I declined the stipend outlined in the will. I have no financial connection to the Wilson estate any longer. Whatever this is about. It's not about the stipend, he interrupted, an unusual urgency in his tone. It's about something else entirely. Something your father arranged to be revealed only after certain conditions were met. Conditions that, according to my research, you have now satisfied. A chill ran through me despite the warm evening air. What conditions? That you establish yourself independently in the wine industry. Successfully. He cleared his throat. The recognition of your Pinot Noir at the Northwest Wine Showcase was the final confirmation I needed. My mind raced. My father had been monitoring my career trajectory from beyond the grave, had established conditions I knew nothing about. For what purpose? What exactly are we talking about here, Mr. Jenkins? A sealed envelope, to be opened in your presence only after the conditions were met. I'm not at liberty to discuss its contents over the phone. All I can say is that your father was most explicit about the procedures to be followed. I sank onto a nearby boulder, suddenly needing the support. My father had always been methodical, strategic in his business dealings, but this sounded more like a plot from a mystery novel than the straightforward man I'd known. You understand why this sounds strange to me, I hope, I said carefully. After the reading of the will, I understand completely, he assured me, and I wouldn't insist if it weren't genuinely important. Your father was quite specific that this matter should take precedence over other obligations once the conditions were met. A vineyard worker called to me from several rows over, indicating another section ready for testing. Harvest waited. For no one, certainly not for mysterious legal summons from the past. I can't simply abandon my responsibilities here, I told Jenkins. We begin picking next week. Of course, but perhaps immediately afterward, the timing is significant. Something in his tone conveyed more than his words, a sense that whatever lay in that sealed envelope genuinely mattered, that it wasn't merely administrative or ceremonial. I'll check my schedule, I conceded. If I can arrange proper coverage. Here, I might be able to make a brief trip east after the first phase of harvest is complete, but I need more information before I commit to this. Your father anticipated you might feel that way, Jenkins said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He suggested I tell you, if you hesitated, that it concerns the real will. No. Real will? What could that possibly mean? The will had been read, executed, its terms clear if deeply disappointing. What else could there be? I'll be in touch next week with potential dates, I said finally, curiosity now mingling with my initial skepticism. But Mr. Jenkins? This had better not be a waste of my time. I assure you, Ms. Wilson, it is anything but that. After ending the call, I sat among the vines for a long moment, trying to process this unexpected intrusion from my past. I'd worked so hard to build a new life, a new identity, independent of the Wilson legacy. Second Chance Cellars was thriving on its own merits. Did I really want to revisit the rejection and disappointment I'd left behind? But the phrase, the real will, nagged at me, impossible to dismiss. What had my father planned? What game was he playing even now, from beyond the grave? As I resumed my testing of the grapes, checking sugar levels and acidity, I couldn't shake a growing sense that everything I'd built here in Oregon, my independence, my success on my own terms, had somehow been part of a larger plan I knew nothing about. Harvest proceeded with its usual intensity, long days of physical labor, critical decisions about picking times, monitoring fermentations, managing the controlled chaos of fruit arriving while wine was being made. I threw myself into the work, pushing thoughts of Jenkins' call and my father's mysterious arrangements to the back of my mind. But in quiet moments, late at night when the day's work was done, Questions surfaced like bubbles in fermenting wine. Why had my father established secret conditions around my independence? What could possibly be in an envelope so important it required a cross-country trip to view? And most persistently, if there was indeed a real will, what did that make the one that had been read after his death? Elena, always my sounding board, urged caution. It could be nothing, some sentimental letter he wanted you to have only after you'd proven yourself. Or it could be a final power play, trying to draw you back into the family drama now that you're establishing yourself independently. Or, I countered, sorting through harvest data at our kitchen table, it could be something genuinely important that he wanted handled in a specific way for reasons we don't yet understand. She sighed, refilling our coffee cups. You're going, aren't you? I think I have to, if only to put the past truly behind me. Once the first and most crucial phase of harvest was complete, with all the Pinot Noir safely fermenting under Miguel's watchful eye, I made arrangements for a brief trip east. 3 days, no more, just enough time to meet with Jenkins, address whatever mystery my father had orchestrated, and return to the winery where I was truly needed. As my flight descended toward Burlington, I gazed out at the familiar Vermont landscape, so different from Oregon's, yet still capable of stirring memories both comforting and painful. The rolling hills with their patchwork of forests and fields, the distinctive silhouette of the Green Mountains, the clear, cold quality of autumn light that seemed to define every edge with crystal precision. I hadn't told my mother or siblings I was coming. Whatever this meeting revealed, I wanted to process it privately before deciding whether to engage with the family I'd left behind. Second Chance Cellars had given me not just professional success, but personal clarity. I was no longer defined by their expectations or limitations, and I intended to maintain that hard-won independence. The rental car I'd reserved waited at the airport, and I drove through familiar streets with a curious sense of detachment, as though viewing a place I'd once lived through a slightly distorting lens. Burlington hadn't changed, but my perspective had. The landmarks of my former life, the upscale restaurants where we'd hosted Wilson Family Vineyards events, the boutiques where my mother had insisted on purchasing appropriate clothes for me, even the university where I'd begun my education before transferring to a California program with stronger viticulture focus, all seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. I checked into a downtown hotel rather than staying at the family estate, unpacked the single small suitcase I'd brought, and called Jenkins to confirm our meeting for the following morning. Whatever revelation awaited me, I wanted to face it, with the clear head that came from a night's good rest. But sleep proved elusive. I lay awake in the unfamiliar room, mind cycling through possibilities. What could be so important that it required such elaborate conditions? What had my father really wanted for me? And why hadn't he simply told me while he was alive? Morning found me tired but resolved, dressed in simple business attire as I walked, the few blocks to Jenkins' law office. The familiar brick building with its polished brass nameplate looked unchanged from my childhood visits, a constant in a life that had transformed dramatically. The receptionist recognized me immediately, her professional smile warming with genuine welcome. Ms. Wilson, so good to see you again. Mr. Jenkins is expecting you. Please go right in. Jenkins rose from behind his imposing desk as I entered, extending his hand with the formal courtesy I remembered. Rebecca, thank you for making this journey. I understand it comes at a particularly demanding time for you professionally. Harvest waits for no one, I replied, taking the offered seat. Not even mysterious legal summons, he acknowledged, my light attempt at humor with a small smile. Indeed. Well, I won't keep you in suspense any longer than necessary. From a drawer in his desk, he removed a thick envelope sealed with wax. Old-fashioned, deliberate, unmistakably my father's style in its attention to detail. My name was written across the front in his distinctive handwriting, the letters precise and authoritative even in this personal context. "Before I give you this," Jenkins said, holding the envelope between both hands, "there are a few things I should explain. Your father came to me approximately 3 months before his passing, when his health had begun to decline noticeably. He had 2 documents prepared, the will that was read to your family after his death, and this." He placed the envelope on the desk between us, its presence almost physically palpable in the quiet office. He gave me very specific instructions. The will was to be executed as read, with the conditions exactly as you remember them. This second document was to be given to you, and only you, 1 year after his passing, but on one condition, that you had established yourself independently in the wine industry. I frowned, confusion mingling with growing curiosity. Why would he do that? Why not simply include whatever this is in the original will? Jenkins's expression was carefully neutral. Your father was a man who believed in testing character, in proving worth rather than simply conferring it. He had his reasons, which I believe will become clear once you read what's inside. He slid the envelope across the polished surface of the desk. It's yours now. You may open it here if you wish, or take it with you. The choice is yours. I stared at the envelope, its weight seeming to increase with every passing second. Whatever. It contained represented my father's final communication to me, arranged with deliberate secrecy, contingent on conditions I'd had no knowledge of when fulfilling them. Did he expect me to leave? I asked suddenly. To start my own winery? Was that part of some plan? Jenkins considered his words carefully. I believe he expected you to follow your own path, whatever that might be. The condition was not that you start your own winery specifically, but that you establish yourself independently in the industry. Had you taken a position with another established vineyard and achieved recognition there, that would have satisfied the condition equally well. But not if I'd stayed at Winston Family Vineyards in the role outlined in the will, I noted. He deliberately created conditions that would push me away. Your father was... Jenkins paused, choosing his words with evident care. He was a complex man with definite ideas about character development. I can't speak to his intentions beyond what he explicitly shared with me. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the papers inside, the solidity of the wax seal. Whatever game my father had been playing, I was about to discover the final move. Thank you for your discretion all this time, I said, rising from my chair with the envelope held firmly in my hand. I'll be in touch if I have any questions after reading this. Jenkins nodded, his expression sympathetic but professional. Of course. And Rebecca? Congratulations on your success with Second Chance Cellars. From what I've read, your wines are quite remarkable. They are, I said simply, without false modesty. I'd earned the right to acknowledge the quality of what I'd created. Outside, the autumn air was crisp with impending winter, leaves swirling along the sidewalk in bursts of gold and russet. I clutched the envelope inside my coat, protecting it from the breeze as I walked not back to my hotel, but toward the small park where I'd often gone to think during my university days. Finding an isolated bench overlooking Lake Champlain, I finally allowed myself to break the seal on my father's last communication, filled with equal parts dread and curiosity about what the real will might contain. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the papers from the envelope. The lake stretched before me, a vast sheet of blue-gray beneath the autumn sky, but I barely noticed its beauty. My attention was fixed entirely on my father's familiar handwriting covering several pages of his personal stationery, the heavy, cream paper embossed with the Winston family crest that he'd used for all important correspondence. My dearest Rebecca, the letter began, and those 3 words alone were enough to give me pause. My father had never been demonstrative, had rarely used terms of endearment. Dearest was my mother's word, not his. I steadied myself and continued reading, If you're reading this, then you've done exactly what I believed you would. You've created your own path in the wine world, established your own identity apart from the Wilson name and legacy. I always knew you would, though you likely doubt that now. I owe you an explanation for what must have seemed like a cruel rejection. The will that was read after my death, the one that relegated you to a token role while giving Thomas control of the vineyard, was a fiction. Or rather, a test. A catalyst designed to propel you toward the future I always envisioned for you, though I lacked the courage to tell you directly. Wilson Family Vineyards has been the center of our family for generations, passed from father to son in an unbroken line that I was expected to continue. When your mother gave us a daughter first, I was unprepared. Not disappointed. Never that. But uncertain how to prepare you for a world and an industry that remained stubbornly traditional, often hostile to women in leadership roles. Then Thomas arrived, and the path seemed clear again. He would inherit, as I had from my father. The natural order would be preserved. But as you both grew, I began to see with increasing clarity what I had not allowed myself to recognize earlier. You were the true winemaker in the family, the true visionary. Your passion wasn't just for the business or the status, but for the craft itself, for the alchemy that transforms fruit into something transcendent. Your education, your internships, your quiet innovations, even as Thomas and the board dismissed your ideas, all confirmed what I had begun to suspect years earlier. You were the future of winemaking in our family, not your brother. But Wilson Family Vineyards, as it existed under my leadership, would have stifled your potential. The weight of tradition, the resistance to change, the subtle and not-so-subtle gender expectations, all would have constrained you, forced you to fight battles daily just to implement the smallest innovations. You needed freedom, space to develop, your own voice, your own vision, without the constant pressure to maintain the Wilson way of doing things. You needed to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that your talent and determination were enough, with or without the family name and resources behind you. So I created a scenario that would force you to leave, to find your wings. Harsh, perhaps even cruel from your perspective, but necessary, I believed, for you to become the winemaker you were meant to be. Enclosed with this letter is the real will, the legal document that supersedes what was read after my passing. It stipulates that if, within 2 years of my death, you have established yourself independently in the wine industry, ownership and control of Wilson Family Vineyards transfers to you. Not a shared role, not a subordinate position, but full authority. The choice of what to do with it is now yours. Maintain your new venture and sell Wilson Family Vineyards. Merge the two under your leadership. Transform the family business with the vision and techniques you've developed independently. The decision belongs to you alone, as it always should have. Your mother knows nothing of this arrangement. Thomas and Elizabeth believe what they were told. Only Mr. Jenkins was aware, charged with monitoring your progress and delivering this letter at the appropriate time. Whatever you decide, know that I have watched your journey with immense pride. The independent path you've carved, the wines you're creating, the woman and winemaker you've become. These are your true inheritance, regardless of what happens with the family business. I should have told you all this while I lived. Should have acknowledged your gifts openly, championed your vision rather than testing it through adversity. That failure is mine alone to bear, and for it, I can only ask your forgiveness, not as a condition of your inheritance, but as a father who loved his daughter imperfectly but completely. With pride and love, your father. I sat motionless on the bench, the pages trembling in my hands as a brisk wind off the lake threatened to scatter them. The legal document attached to the letter confirmed everything. A properly executed will, naming me as the primary beneficiary of Wilson Family Vineyards, contingent only on the condition that I establish myself independently in winemaking within 2 years of my father's death, a condition I had fulfilled without knowing it existed. Emotions collided within me. Shock, vindication, lingering hurt, and beneath it all, a complex tenderness toward the flawed man who had orchestrated this elaborate scenario. My father had seen me, had valued my potential, had even been proud of me, but had chosen to express that recognition through a test rather than through direct support and acknowledgement. It was manipulative. It was presumptuous. It had caused me genuine pain and uncertainty. And yet, it had also given me second-chance sellers, had forced me to discover my own strength, my own vision, unconstrained by family expectations or traditions. Had I inherited Wilson Family Vineyards directly, would I have had the courage to implement the innovations I now knew were possible? Or would I have been cautious, incremental, always looking over my shoulder for approval from the ghosts of Wilson men past? I gathered the papers carefully, returning them to the envelope as my mind raced with implications. According to the legal document, I was now the owner of Wilson Family Vineyards, a business I had walked away from, had built a new life without, had finally stopped measuring myself against. What would I do with this unexpected inheritance? What should I do? I walked back to my hotel in a daze, the envelope secure inside my coat, its contents reshaping my understanding of the past 2 years with every step. In my room, I poured a glass of water with shaking hands and called the one person who might help me make sense of this revelation. "Elena, it's me. You're not going to believe what just happened. I explained everything. The secret will, my father's posthumous orchestration, the impossible choice now facing me." She listened without interrupting, a rare feat for Elena, only exhaling audibly when I finished. I don't even have words," she finally said. "Manipulative genius? Paternal chess master? I'm torn between admiring his strategic mind and wanting to resurrect him just to yell at him for putting you through all this." "That makes 2 of us," I admitted, staring out the hotel window at the familiar Burlington skyline. "But the question remains. What do I do now?" "What do you want to do?" Elena countered. "Forget the should for a minute. What does Becca Wilson, winemaker and woman who's finally found her own path, want?" I considered the question, allowing myself to set aside practical concerns and simply feel my way toward an answer. I want to keep building second-chance sellers. It's mine in a way Wilson Family Vineyards never would be, even if I owned it outright. I've put my heart into it, my vision. It represents who I truly am as a winemaker. "Then there's your answer," Elena said simply. "But Wilson Family Vineyards is worth millions. The land alone can be sold," she interrupted, "or managed as an investment while you focus on what truly fulfills you. Becca, you left once because that place didn't value your vision. Getting ownership now doesn't change what it is. A winery built on traditions that constrained you." She was right, of course. Ownership of Wilson Family Vineyards represented financial security, family legacy, even vindication, but not necessarily fulfillment or authentic expression of my winemaking philosophy. "I need to think," I told her, "and there are conversations I need to have first." "With Tom and Liz," she surmised, "and my mother. She deserves to know the truth, even if she wasn't part of his plan." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet hotel room. My father's letter spread before me and drafted a brief email to my mother, brother, and sister. "I'm in Burlington for the day. There's something important we need to discuss as a family. Can we meet at the house at 7 tonight?" Their responses came quickly. Surprise from my mother, cautious civility from Tom, enthusiasm from Liz. None knew what awaited them, the seismic shift about to rock the foundations of what they believed about our father and his intentions. I spent the afternoon walking familiar streets, reacquainting myself with the city that had once been home. Burlington felt smaller now, more contained than the wide-open possibilities of Oregon, but there was comfort in its familiarity, the same shops lining Church Street, the same view of the Adirondacks across the lake, the same crisp scent of approaching winter in the air. By the time I drove up the long gravel driveway to the Wilson family estate that evening, I had reached a decision. Not perfect, perhaps not even what my father had envisioned, but authentic to who I had become and what I valued most. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Imposing, traditional, beautiful in its way, but weighted with expectations. My mother met me at the door, her embrace tentative as if unsure of her welcome. "Rebecca, you look different, stronger, somehow." "Oregon agrees with me," I said simply, following her into the formal living room where Tom and Liz waited. The reunion was awkward, laden with unspoken tensions and divergent expectations. Liz hugged me too enthusiastically, peppering me with questions about life in Portland that she didn't wait for me to answer. Tom offered a stiff handshake and a cautious, "You're looking well," his eyes assessing my simple clothes with barely disguised judgment. When we were all seated, my mother with practiced poise, Tom standing by the fireplace in an unconscious echo of our father's habitual position, Liz perched on the edge of the sofa. I took a deep breath and removed the envelope from my bag. "I'm here because I received some unexpected information from Mr. Jenkins," I began, watching their expressions shift from polite attention to sharper focus at the mention of our father's attorney. "Information that affects all of us and the future of Wilson Family Vineyards." "What kind of information?" Tom asked, his tone already defensive. "Dad left a second will," I said simply, holding up the document. "One that Mr. Jenkins was instructed to give me only after I had established myself independently in the wine industry, which apparently I have done." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face drained of color. Liz's mouth opened in a small O of surprise. Tom's expression hardened into disbelief. "That's impossible," he finally said. "The will was read and executed. The business transferred. It's been nearly 2 years. And yet, here it is," I replied, handing him the legal document, properly executed, witnessed, entirely valid, and quite different from what we were told after Dad died. Tom scanned the document, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching anger. "This gives you control of the vineyard. Everything. The business. The land. All of it. If I met the condition, yes." I turned to my mother, whose composure had faltered only slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head slowly. "No, he never said. Though perhaps I should have suspected. He spoke differently about you in those last months, asked questions about your work at the vineyard during his illness, seemed contemplative about things I didn't understand at the time." Liz grabbed the document from Tom, her eyes widening as she read. "This can't be legal, can it? We've been running the business for 2 years, making decisions, investments." "It's legal," I confirmed. "I've already consulted with an attorney to verify. Dad arranged everything meticulously, as always." "So you've come to claim your prize," Tom said bitterly. "To take over and implement all those radical changes you were always pushing for. To erase what generations of Wilsons built because you think you know better." "Actually, no." That simple contradiction silenced him. All three turned to me with varying degrees of confusion. "I didn't come to take over Wilson Family Vineyards," I explained. "I came to offer a different solution, one that honors what Dad intended while respecting what we've all built in the meantime." From my bag, I withdrew a folder containing documents my attorney had prepared based on our phone consultation earlier that day. "I'm proposing a restructuring. Wilson Family Vineyards remains under your operational control, Tom, with you as CEO. But the business is reorganized with a proper board of directors, including all family members plus 2 independent industry experts. I handed copies of the proposal to each of them. Major decisions, expansion, significant changes in winemaking approach, land sales, would require board approval. Each of us would have an equal financial stake and equal voting rights. Professional. Management with family governance. And what about your Oregon experiment? Tom asked, scanning the proposal with a frown. Second Chance Cellars remains independent, my sole venture. No Wilson connection, no Wilson resources. I've built it from nothing. I intend to continue that way. But you're entitled to everything, Liz pointed out, bewildered. The whole vineyard, the business. Why would you share what's legally yours? It was a fair question. By the letter of the legal document, I could claim full ownership, implement whatever changes I wanted, even sell the entire operation if I chose. My father had given me that power, perhaps believing I would use it to reshape Wilson Family Vineyards according to my vision. But my journey had taught me something more valuable than asserting control or proving myself right. It had shown me that true fulfillment came from authentic expression, from building something that reflected my own values rather than fighting to reform something built on different principles. Because Wilson Family Vineyards doesn't need a conqueror, I said. Simply. It needs balance, tradition and innovation, history and future. All of us bringing our strengths to preserve what works while evolving what doesn't. My mother's eyes shone with unexpected tears. Your father would be proud of this solution, more than you know. Tom looked less convinced, still gripping. The proposal like it might bite. And if we refuse? If we challenge the will? You'd lose, I said calmly. The document is ironclad, the witnesses impeccable, the legal ground solid. But more importantly, we'd all lose years to legal battles, family relationships, focus on the business itself. Is that really the legacy any of us wants? He didn't. Answer immediately. His expression troubled as he struggled with the implications. Liz looked between us anxiously, always the peacemaker in family conflicts. I need time to think about this, Tom finally said. To review it with our attorneys. Of course, take the time you need. I gathered my bag, preparing to leave. I fly back to Oregon tomorrow evening. My contact information is in the proposal if you have questions or want to discuss modifications. My mother walked me to the door, lingering in the entryway as Tom and Liz remained in the living room, already deep in whispered conversation. He really did see you, she said quietly. All those years when you thought he didn't notice, he was watching, evaluating. In his own flawed way, he was trying to give you what he thought you needed most. Freedom, I acknowledged. The chance to find my own voice without the weight of the Wilson legacy determining my choices. She nodded, her eyes sad but clear. He should have told you directly. Should have acknowledged your talents openly. That was his failure. One of many. But he did love you, Rebecca, in his own complicated way. I know that now. I hugged her, this woman who had navigated her own complex relationship with the Wilson Vineyard and traditions. Will you come visit me in Oregon someday? See what I've built? I'd like that, she said, surprising me with her ready agreement. Very much. As I drove away from the family estate for what felt like the last time as an exile, I experienced not the bitterness of my first departure, but a curious sense of completeness. I had left in anger and confusion. I was leaving now with clarity and purpose. Whatever Tom and the family decided about my proposal, I knew where my future lay. Among the hillside vineyards of Oregon, in the small winery I had built with my own hands and vision. My father's posthumous revelation had offered validation, certainly. Vindication, even. But most importantly, it had given me the freedom to choose my own path not from rejection or rebellion, but from clear-eyed assessment of where my passion truly lived. The final email from Tom arrived just as I was boarding my flight back to Portland the following evening. I opened it standing in the jetway, heart pounding with uncertainty. After consultation with our attorneys and considerable thought, we accept your proposal with minor modifications outlined in the attached document. A reasonable and fair solution that honors Dad's intentions while preserving what we've all worked for. We'll need your signature on the final agreements once they're drawn up. Safe travels. T. Relief and a complex sense of closure washed over me as I found my seat on the plane. The Wilson family drama had reached its resolution, not with the dramatic takeover my father might have envisioned, nor with the bitter rejection I had once experienced, but with a measured compromise that respected all our journeys over the past 2 years. As the plane lifted off, carrying me back to the life and winery I had built from nothing, I gazed down at the Vermont landscape growing small beneath us. The Wilson vineyard was visible for just a moment. Orderly rows of vines, the imposing family home, the production facility where I had once fought for recognition. It would always be part of me, that land and legacy. But it no longer defined me. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Miguel says first fermentations are perfect. Phoenix rising indeed. I smiled at the reference. To the phoenix on our label, to the journey of rebirth I had undertaken without realizing its full significance, to the wine that had first proven I could create something exceptional on my own terms. Second chance sellers awaited, not as a consolation prize or temporary rebellion, but as my true inheritance. The business I had built, the vision I had realized, the winemaker I had become when freed from others' expectations. The real will had given me legal claim to Wilson Family Vineyards, but in the process of becoming worthy of that inheritance, I had created something more valuable, a life and legacy that were authentically mine. As Oregon's landscape appeared below us hours later, evergreen forests, volcanic mountains, valleys lined with vineyards, I felt the last pieces settle into place. The story my father had set in motion had reached its conclusion, but mine was still unfolding, one vintage at a time, shaped by my own hands and heart. Wine was about transformation, fruit into something transcendent, tradition into innovation, past into future. My transformation was complete. Rebecca Wilson had found her true terroir at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.